So today we're beginning chapter 43 in Tanya. It's on page 122. And before we begin the text, just a brief overview. This chapter 43, the Alter Rebbe concludes talking about Yira, awe, fear, which he began in 41 and 42. So a page or so is dedicated to Yira. And then on page Samach Beis, he starts talking about Ava, and he continues for 6 chapters, level upon level upon level. So if you ever wanted to know what it means to love God and what love is all about, these 6 chapters is the recipe that Chabad gives for Ava. But we're still at Yira. And the premise that the Baal HaTanya gave in chapter 41 when he actually began is that without having basic Yira, which he calls later in chapter 42, Yira Tato, the lower level of Yira, implying there's a higher level, which we're going to learn about today in Mitzvah Shem, which is called Yira Ilo. Without having Yira Tato, your avodah is lacking, and even more so, you're not an Oved Hashem. And the ingredient for avodas Hashem, because when you say avodas Hashem, you're talking about avoda, to work, to slave, to exert. And if you're not in that frame of mind, and you're not going through that experience, you haven't begun to serve God. And this is phenomenal, because that means there could be someone who has a great head, a great heart, and naturally they understand, they get everything, or they feel and they're emotional very easily and all that. And guess what? They're not an Oved Hashem. It doesn't mean to say that they're in a bad place. They're in a better place than being in a bad place. But as far as avodah, es Hashem Elokeichem, you shall serve God, your God, you haven't begun, because it's natural to you. And remember what the Alter Rebbe said in chapter 15. He quotes the Gemara, that in the days of the Gemara, the custom was to learn every piece of Gemara, everything you learned, 100 times. Says the Gemara, that if you learned it 100 times, and you didn't learn it 101 times, one extra time, you're called Aloi Avodoi. This is the Gemara, it's not Chassidus. It's 2,000 years before Chassidus, right? Whatever. Loi Avodoi. You're not a servant. Why aren't you a servant? Because it's natural. It's natural. Everyone was doing it then 100 times. You didn't want to be an outcast. You didn't want to be a pariah. You wanted to be part of the community. When in Rome, follow the Romans. When learning 100 times, follow 100 times. You didn't want to be stigmatized. We have the same issue today. Nothing has changed. When in Borough Park in Williamsburg, when you go under the chuppah, put your shtreimel on. Even if you're not Shomer Shabbos, wear a shtreimel. Could you imagine, Chevra, there are people under the chuppah not Shomer Shabbos wearing shtreimel? It's hard to imagine. It exists. Why? Because the parents say, you want a nice chasana? You want a 10-piece band? You have to wear shtreimel. And guess what? I'll buy you a $10,000 shtreimel if they can afford it. But you got to put on that shtreimel. And it's not only, I'm not saying there's just a single out shtreimel, chas v'sholem. It's the same in Chabad with the kapotas, There are people going under the chuppah with rings, men wearing rings. Now, halachically, you could find a heter. But I'm asking you, is the Messiah for a Jewish man who is a right-wing from man, a Haredi, whatever you call them, to wear a ring under the chuppah? and they wear kapotas. So it's not, and the Litvish should have their thing, and the Sfardish should have their thing, and this is not about Vavadim. This is called convenience Judaism. Now you might say, well, for them it's Vavadim because they don't want to wear the shtreimel, and they don't want to wear the kapot and all that, and they're doing it because their parents want. No, is that Vavadim? That's not Vavadim. That's superficial. So the whole idea of Avadim that the Gemara talks about, and the Alter Rebbe quotes earlier in chapter 15, to learn one more time means to break yourself, to break your habit. Whatever your habit is, go one step further. And that's the litmus test. People always ask, how do I know I'm an Oved Hashem? How do I know I'm really serving God? Maybe I'm just serving myself. The answer, in a nutshell, is do one thing that's hard for you to do, and you need to break your habit. It's that one thing that shows that you are doing the avodah, that you're doing it because of God, not because of yourself and your parents and your community and every other excuse. So along these lines, the Alter Rebbe in 41 and 42, and now in 43, talks about various aspects of this yira, this awe that we must have in order to accomplish Vavadim. More so, he explained to us another very important principle, that even the things that we do that are good, asay toiv, if they're done because we become habituated to them, it's also lacking. In other words, in the ideology of the Alter Rebbe, Asay Tov itself must be predicated on Sur Meirah. Every Asay Tov, I'm doing something good. I'm visiting someone in a nursing home. I'm helping someone cross the street, right? It feels good. If it feels good and it doesn't have the element of avodah, it's lacking. Because today it feels good. And tomorrow, when it doesn't feel good, you're not going to go out and do it. It's too hot outside. So, someone says that the Alter Rebbe in Chabad gives you, you've heard these lines, I've heard it, it gives you an easy way out. They haven't begun to study this Sefer HaTanya. When you study seriously this Sefer HaTanya, you know that he is very demanding of us. The Alter Rebbe is very demanding. But what's the pshat he's demanding? He's bringing out our best potential, i.e. the Beinoni. The best potential comes out of this type of behavior and activity. And he uses the mind as the channel to bring out all of these things in a person, i.e. his boneness, meditation, reflection, contemplation. And this is what he said in 41 and 42. He gave us many, many different types of thoughts to make it easier to access intellectually the awe, the yira tata, which will lead to an ava, to a love. That's a recap of 41, 42, and now let's just continue 43, in which he's going to talk primarily about the comparison, the beginning part, as I said, of Yira Tato to Yiri Ilah. And with that, he's going to reconcile a Chazal. The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, Im ein Yira, ein Chochma. In ein Chochma, ein Yira. Oh, make up your mind, Mishnah. Which one is it? If there's no fear, there's no wisdom. If there's no wisdom, there's no fear. Make up your mind. The Baal Tanya has an answer to it coming up right now. Stay tuned. Perek Mem Gimel. V'hinei al yira tatozu, regarding this lower level of awe, of yira, fear, shehi, its primary purpose is l'kiyum mitzvahs of Yisborach, so that one should fulfill the mitzvahs of God Almighty, whether it be preventing yourself from doing bad, or vasei toiv and doing good, Amru, it's regarding this particular yira that Chazal say, quote, "In bein yira, ein chokhmah." If there is Moshe no yira, there's no chokhmah. Chokhmah means here tshuva ma'asim tovim, right? Right? In other words, if you don't have the rudimentary yira, the tshuva ma'asim tovim is lacking. It's an expression of self, not an expression of God. Therefore, you need to have basic yiras Hashem. However, v'yesh bo b'chinas, v'yesh bo, and within this yira tato, now he says a new point. There is within this itself katnus u'b'chinas gadlus, small yira, called katan, katnut, u'b'chinas gadlus, and large and great yira. And he explains, what does that mean? In other words, we got now two within yira tato. Well, that's already, he's going deeper, he's delving deeper. It's not enough to talk about yira tato. He says there's two aspects to yira tato, and he explains. When a person derives this yira tato through meditating on the greatness of God, God pervades all worlds. And the distance from the earth to the heaven is 500 years, etc. Number 3, between heaven to heaven, is a distance. The feet of the angel group, that's called chayos. Keneged kulam corresponds to the other group of angels. And these are the type of meditative thoughts. Wow, how God is awesome. How God is so exalted. On and on and on. And so one meditates on God's chain of events, in the sense that where the light, the energy of God comes and goes through, called hishtalshalus. It comes from l'mayla, mayla, above, very high. Adrum hamayla is to the highest of all levels, and from there it comes into the person, into the world. Afal became, says the Balatanya, Dalter Rebbe. Nevertheless, nikre yira zu, this type of yira is called yira chitzonius, vitato, an external yira and a low yira. Why? Me'achar, since shenimsheches meha'olamos, because it comes from meditation on the existence of the worlds. Shehem levushim shel hamelech HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The worlds are the garments of the King God Almighty. Asher mistater u'misalem u'mislabish. 3 words meaning God conceals and hides and invests himself bohem in the worlds. Lahacha yosem, to enliven them. Ulakayimom, and to sustain them. Liyas yesh miayim, they should be from nothing they become something, ex nihilo, all that. V'rak shehi ashar v'apesach l'kiyum ha'torah v'mitzvahs. The only thing is that this is the gateway and the opening for fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. What did we learn now? We learned very simple. When we meditate on the greatness of God from the world we're in, that means we're giving credence to the world. We're giving credence to the existence. We call this in Chassidus bitul hayesh, the nullification of the yesh. When you say Hillel bitul hayesh, you're automatically saying there is a yesh, and the yesh is important. However, this yesh sees something greater and has bittul for something that's greater. Bittul hayesh. But bittul hayesh does not mean that there's non-existence. There's existence, and existence is nullified to something that's greater. There is a world. There is a sun. There are planets. There's all these things. There are angels. Everything he enumerated earlier. And all of these things, how do they come to be, and how are they sustained? Through God. But you're accepting that the yesh exists, meaning, and from that, what comes about? That you have respect for God. Why? Because God made the world that we live in. God gives us life. God gives us sustenance and all of that. So the meditation, the most it can accomplish is a yira, an awe, a fear for God that has existence as its root. And therefore, it's not the ultimate in yira. It cannot create the ultimate in yira. It's a yira that's always predicated on yesh, on existence. That's why he says, look at the language towards the end of the few last words that we learned. Rak shehi ashar. Rak shehi ashar. Pesach is like an afterthought. Yeah, the only thing it's good. The only thing it's good for is for Torah and mitzvahs that we do it. You know, I mean, that's a big thing. But nevertheless, remember, he's not making a comparison. This is what the Baal Tanya calls here katnus of yira. Let's go further, and you'll see for a moment what godless is. And he says, I'm sorry, he jumps to Yiri Law, but before Yiri Law, so what is godless Hayira? He says here, there is, someone's not muted, please mute yourself. He says here that there's two levels within Yirat Torah, godless and godless. And he explains only one. He explains the level of Yira that's called Bittul Hayesh. So the explanation is, he doesn't write it or verbalize it, but there's called Bittul HaMetziut, Bittul B'Metzias. That's the terminology in Chabad. Nullification of existence. There's no existence. Now, what does it mean there's no existence? Like the Rebbe Marash, they said, if there's no existence, lay down on the table and I'll give you Malchus. You jump up from the pain and we'll see how there's no existence. No existence. We mean in concept. How much did the bittul pervade you? How egoless are you? In bittul b'metzias, not just the existence is nullified. The existence becomes so nullified that it becomes non-existent. In other words, the entity, the notion of existence is non-existence. Why is the notion of existence non-existent? Because you come to a point where you realize that it's all Einoid Milvadoi, including existence. You see, the first idea of Einoid Milvadoi, it's not Einoid Milvadoi. There's two things, by the way. There's Ein Oid Milvadoi and there's Ein Oid. Ein Oid. It doesn't say Ein Oid Milvadoi. Ein Oid. It's explained in Chabad Chassidus at length the difference between Ein Oid and Ein Oid Milvadoi. And briefly, Ein Oid is much deeper than Ein Oid Milvadoi. Because when we say Ein Oid Milvadoi, you know what we're saying? That with him, there is something. Ein Oid Milvadoi. But with him, there is something. When you say Ein Oid, the implication is Ein Oid. There's no Milvadoi. So this is the question. The consciousness of the person through his meditation. What point does it come to? So the Alter Rebbe says that in Yirat Torah itself, in this level of Yira, one sensation is Ein Oid Milvadoi. Yirat Torah, existence exists, but it gives itself over to something greater. The higher level of Yirat Torah, not Yirei Ilah, that we're getting to in a moment. The higher level of Yirat Torah is Ein Oid. I hope I explained it, well. If you have an example to express this, you could tell us at some point. But this is the idea. Yes, Hillel, go ahead.
It seems like the Ein Od is a pairing of two opposites.
Is a what?
An ot
Is
provides something, and an ein provides a nothing.
Of course, it's two opposites. Existence and non-existence are opposites.
Yeah.
But what we're saying is, what's the maximum feeling that can come about from an einoid milvadoi versus an einoid? And I'm saying the difference is like the difference between what we call bittul hayesh in comparison to bittul b'metzias. Is the idea an idea, but it's submerged by something greater? Or is the idea itself a non-idea because it loses existence? Now the Alter Rebbe talks about what we call the higher level of Yira. Yira Yilo, that we call that the upper level of Yira, Yira Yilo, Yore Boishis. This he calls Yirei Boishis, or coming from Busha. And we also have another name for this, Moshe, Yira Pnimius, inner Yira. Why? Shehinim Sheches Mipnimius Olikus. This does not come from the outer aspect of God, but the inner. Shebetoicho Elomis, that are within the worlds. And it's regarding this level of Yiri Lo, Leo Omru. So when the Mishnah says, Im Ein Chochma, Ein Yira, and he